All right, Jim Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com is here. Steve Layman of News Channel 5 will join us momentarily. Titans just about an hour removed from the practice field. Jimmy, no A.J. Brown to add to all of the different players who are not going to be playing in this game. I think that if you were betting whether the Titans IR and unavailable players would win a game versus the Titans basically practice squad, at this point, I think the Titans injuries might be favored by 3. But I don't know what they're going to do against New England. This A.J. Brown thing is big for them.
It is. I mean, you just wonder how much the team can sustain. And I think we saw a little bit of that this past Sunday. Is starting to catch up with them a little bit. I mean, you mentioned the receivers are out. Julio on IR, Marcus Johnson on IR. He's done for the season. Now A.J. Brown not available. You're going into the game with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, obviously Chester Rogers, Des Fitzpatrick, and then you have to make a move on the practice squad. Some options there. Cody Hollister, to Golden Tate, who was just called up, and so you've got to get somebody else in the mix. It's a huge challenge going up against a team that knows how to take advantage of teams that are shorthanded. So Titans have to play well, have to be more consistent, and no AJ makes it a big challenge.
Steve is here. He looks very dapper. This is deeply disappointing because I look like a scrub and it's my podcast. I'm going to hold that against you, Steve. But yeah, just talking about A.J. Brown not going to play. And at this point, what the challenge is against New England, the only thing that they have going for them from an advantageous standpoint is this may be the one team in the NFL that's not scared of playing at New England and playing Bill Belichick. With Mike Vrabel and the way that they've had success up there before, but this is becoming an infinitely more or taller task.
Yeah, Buck, and they're also not scared of playing shorthanded because they've been doing that basically every week of the season. They firmly believe in this next man up mantra, but the problem we've had over the last few weeks is there does come a point where the next man up is nowhere near the man who he's replacing. And we've kind of seen that with Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown is certainly that guy this weekend that you just add into the mix on top of all the other guys they're missing. I think it caught up with them Sunday against Houston. I mean, you can say they were sloppy, they maybe weren't focused, Tannehill had his worst day and all that. But to me, it comes back to they just didn't have great bodies on the field. And at some point, when you looked across the line, the Titans weren't all that much better, man for man, than the Texans were in that game. And it came down to the wire, and the Texans won the football game because they were a little bit better on Sunday. When you look at the game this Sunday in New England, the Patriots have the better personnel by a fairly significant margin given who's out for the Titans. And so they're going to need a monumental effort. To me, this is going to be about a game where they have to come in with the mindset that they're going to be physical and they're going to win this game kind of with bravado, and they're going to win it in the trenches. The offensive line, I think, has to be the best they've been the entire season in this game to allow them to run the football and get into their offense. And I think Jeff Simmons and Danico Autry, as awesome as they've been throughout the course of the year, they need to be even better Sunday to try to affect Mac Jones and that running game that the Patriots build off of. That's the type of performance the Titans need to have a chance.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add to that. Buck. I mean, even Harold Landry said today after practice that Vrabel's challenged the defense. You got to be better than the Patriots defense. So that's how they win. They got to keep the 13-10, 17-14 type of game, make some plays on defense, do what the Texans did to the Titans, force turnovers. But, not to belabor the point about the injuries even more, but, Vrabel said today, it's even affecting how much they can practice, just what they can do. They don't have enough healthy bodies to get through and to do a lot of speed work. So I do agree that I think we started to see signs last week of it catching up to them.
Well, and with the way that Mac Jones is playing right now, Jimmy, I'm looking at this and saying, all right, they did well against the Houston Texans and Tyrod Taylor in that there wasn't a ton of offense, particularly in the second half, and they really held them down outside of that one big drive in the first half of that game. But because the ball is coming out so quick in that offense, the pass rush doesn't have necessarily the time to get home. And that's exactly what Mac Jones and the Patriots and Josh McDaniels are doing right now. This dude is getting in rhythm because he's not getting hit.
Yeah, and he's not making a whole bunch of mistakes. I mean, he is playing well. He's been smart. What they want to do and what the Titans can't afford to have happen is to kind of jump ahead, get an early lead, force the Titans to throw the ball. Titans have got to do some things to impact Mac Jones, and that's the challenge. If he's getting rid of the ball quickly, you're going to be limited just how much you can do to slow him down and force mistakes.
See, and Buck, and that's why I cited the two guys I did on the defensive line, and Simmons and Autry. Is, to me, this doesn't feel like a game where you're going to be able to manufacture pressure from the outside. You're going to be able to bring delayed blitzes and make something happen because they just get the ball out too quick. And it may not be getting to Mac Jones as in getting him on the ground and getting a sack, but can Jeff Simmons and Danico Autry push that pocket, get it in his face quickly, and maybe get their hands up, bat down a few balls, just get them out of rhythm. I think that's the thing that the Titans have to do consistently on Sunday. Again, it may not show up in the stat column necessarily, but can they just bother him enough to get him off rhythm? That could be huge.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I mean, I think it's going to be still a competitive football game, just as this last Sunday was competitive. It may not have been, pretty, as a lot of these games really in the last month have not been terribly aesthetically pleasing, but I know that doesn't matter when it comes to winning football games. Like, it still feels like it can be competitive because, I mean, the defense is playing at a high level and has been playing at a high level. Now, you're going to be without Chris Jackson in this game. We don't know what the final injury report, or if there's going to be any adjustments to the injury report on Saturday as we tape this podcast on a Friday. But right now it looks like Jack Rabbit and Christian Fulton are going to be out there with the two safeties, as close to healthy as the secondary has felt in some time. I don't know how you force a Bill Belichick team into making mistakes, Jim, when that's not what they do at all. And if you do, you end up cut in most situations because a lot of these dudes are disposable.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, so it's a tough, scenario for the Titans. I go way back to 2003 in this series, and obviously things a lot different. I remember the Titans going up there to face a Patriots team that year that was so banged up. They didn't have anybody available in the secondary. I think that's the first time Troy Brown had really played. He was a receiver who ended up playing on the defensive side of the ball. And I think everybody counted the Patriots out in that game. Mike Vrabel was among the long list of Patriots who didn't play. And the Patriots were able to rally the troops, and they upset the Titans. And that was the first of like 12 straight wins to finish out the regular season. The Patriots went on to win the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's the kind of things that teams have to do when you're banged up. And the Patriots did it that year. Now the Titans are going up there this year. Not a lot of people giving them a chance. They're going to have to do some things to play well, somehow get to the bye week at 9-4. If they do that, it's going to be one of the better wins Mike Vrabel's had in his coaching career, but that's a tall task. And I'm certainly not predicting that's going to happen here like it did back 18 years ago.
Oh, Jimmy, I thought I was going to trick you into a game prediction. Damn, I thought we were going to get away with that one. Yeah, I mean, listen, we've seen him do it before. Like, I just, my biggest problem is I don't know how to analyze this team, Steve, because I don't know who's playing. I mean, I do know who's playing for this team every week, but like, I don't know what they are right now based on just how many different dudes. I mean, they're going to clear this record of 84 players who've dressed for a single NFL team in a season, in a regular season, by a fair amount. I would bet the over at this point, given the amount of players with Nate Davis and David Long and Rashaan Evans and A.J. Brown, Jeremy McNichols, among some of the names who are not going to participate in this game, who Mike Vrabel has already ruled out. It's tough to kind of get a grasp on who they are because they're different every week.
They are, and the defense has managed to hold some level of consistency, even with a few different bodies coming in there. I mean, all the linebackers have been relatively effective, even though we've seen Rashaan Evans out, we've seen David Long out, we've seen Jayon Brown out at times, but whoever's been available and healthy has played at a pretty high level at that position. So the defense has kind of hummed along. The offense, you cannot say the same. And I throw this out to you guys. When you look at the game on Sunday, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the offensive line has to have their best game of the year. Ryan Tannehill has to be way better than he was on Sunday, but maybe better than he's been all season long. Yeah. He's going to have to carry this team. But when you talk about the playmakers and where they're going to get a play from, who is that? this week. I mean, which running back do you trust to carry the ball and consistently gain yards for this team? Which wide receiver right now do you trust to come up with the big third down catch or the red zone conversion that they have to get? I mean, Nick Westbrook-Akina is probably the guy at the top of my list right now. And if you would have told any Titans fan back in training camp that you'd be banking on him to make the play against the Patriots to help you stay in the game or win the game, they would have really cringed given what they thought they had on this offense.
Jimmy?
That's very fair. And, I think the running back situation, you would love for somebody to establish themselves and be that guy moving forward. But I think the Titans still trying to figure out exactly what they have. We're going to see D'Onta Foreman, and I think the game's going well. He's going to get a lot of carries. But Dontrell Hilliard's going to be in the mix there. It's going to be a combination of those two. And then at the receiver position, you're exactly right. I mean, Nick Westbrook-Akina is the number one receiver right now. And it's just a matter of who else is going to be out there with them. We know we're going to see Chester Rogers, Des Fitzpatrick. I mean, he makes a touchdown catch, but I think that kind of disguises some of the other issues that he had on the day when, Tannehill takes the heat, but it wasn't all his fault. And some of that's because of some lackadaisical route running. So somebody's going to be added to that mix from the practice squad, either Hollister, Tate, maybe both, and they're going to be expected to play and help the team. And Titans can't afford to turn the ball over. They're just going to have to try to keep the ball with a group of guys that somebody had told you they were going to be your starters back at the start of the season. I think you probably wouldn't have liked your chances of being 8-3 and in this game.
Not Joe Rexrode, baby. NWY, wide receiver 2. He's gonna if he wasn't flaking on us to go to Tennessee Vanderbilt this Saturday, I would make him wear his NWY button in the press box, because it's they're gonna need it out of somebody. But I wonder how you guys feel about the notion that they just need to pick one of these running backs and stick with it. Like, I know nobody's gonna get Derrick Henry level volume. He's unprecedented in the way that he started this season for a reason. It's tough to do at that position, but it just feels like I don't know that they outright hurt themselves with as much as going back and forth. And I know Adrian Peterson won't be a part of the conversation this week, having been waived earlier, but it just feels like they almost throw themselves out of rhythm when they keep trying to get guys reps after one of them finds their stride. I felt like that with D'Onta Foreman not getting carries until late into the second half in this game.
Yeah, I think there is something to that, but we also really haven't seen any of these guys get going at a consistent enough level to necessarily say, okay, that's the guy. Let's start him and give him 3 or 4 possessions and see where it gets going. I do think the running game is important this week, though, whether it's by committee or whether they settle on a guy to give them a majority of the carries. We saw them against Houston run the most effectively we've seen the Titans run since Derrick Henry went down in the first half of the game. They didn't get anything to show for it. They were shut out on the scoreboard, and therefore they essentially had to abandon the run in the second half of that game. They cannot be in that position this Sunday in New England. They need to be as effective as they were in the first half against Houston, and they've got to be in a position in the second half of the game that they can continue to do it. So whether it's Hilliard or whether it's Foreman or whether it's somebody else, they're going to have to stick with the run, and this offensive line is going to have to get that guy enough of a crease that he can get 3 or 4 yards a pop, and they can stay with this for a full 4 quarters. Because I think you're right. I think they're going to be in the game, just like they were last Sunday against Houston. But what they cannot they cannot be chasing the scoreboard, and the running game is incredibly important for that.
Yeah, I think it threw Todd Downing awful. I don't want to say threw them off, but I think it takes them out of what their game plan is, Jimmy, just like Arizona did when they were getting, now this was a different way that they got beat. Arizona beating you with explosive plays, and this one just turning into points off of miscues from the quarterback and the offense in general. But when the score gets that lopsided, they don't run the ball with the kind of consistency that this team wants to do it. It's what separates them from, maybe 30 other NFL teams, excluding Baltimore, with the way that they like to focus on running the football.
Yeah, and I think the start is obviously the key. I mean, if you fall behind like you did last week, then you're not going to be able to just continue to run it. And I'm like Steve. I mean, yeah, it would be great if you could have a back emerge and be the primary running back, but somebody's got to earn it. I mean, somebody prove it. And yeah, it's tough to do when you're running 7-8 times a game. And that's why this game needs to be close to allow the Titans to continue to hammer away. And I think if it is a close game and this is a game the Titans are able to run the football, I do think Foreman is the one that emerges with the majority of these carries. But if they fall behind, I think you're going to see a lot more of Hilliard. Going to be in more of a catch-up mode, and I think that's a doomsday scenario for the Titans.
Can I jump in on that comment for a second too? Because I think there's an interesting dynamic here, and I hesitate to criticize Mike Vrabel at all because I think he's handled the injuries with this team and how he's game planned for him, how he's got guys ready to play. I think he's handled it brilliantly. But I thought Sunday against the Texans, he was trying to straddle a line of dealing with not having his weapons on the field offensively and maybe thinking, all right, we're not going to score 35 points today, with being overly aggressive, if you follow me. Early on in that game, he's going for it 4th and 2 at the 35. He goes for it 4th and 1 at the 30. And in all the time, it felt like they felt they needed a touchdown on every possession. And when you take the field, that's a great mindset. But at some point, you have to know when to fold the cards, so to speak, and line up and take a field goal. And especially when they got down at that game, it felt a little bit to me like they tried to get a 12-0 deficit back in one play at times. And I think that's especially important going to New England. It's okay to be aggressive. You may have to be aggressive given where you are offensively. Like if you've got 4th and 1 at the 25-yard line, you may need to go for that because you don't know how many chances you're going to get down there in the red zone in the course of the game. But you got to be careful that you don't do it every time because you never go broke making a profit. And Randy Bullock's been pretty good here. And sometimes 3 can be good against a team like New England. The other side of that is when Vrabel throws his trust into them and wants to be aggressive, they got to come up with a play. Yeah. He gave them the trust a few times last week against Houston, and they didn't make any of them against one of the worst teams in the league. The players have to be better in that situation as well. But to me, that's going to be an interesting dynamic because it's definitely going to come up Sunday where it's going to be, okay, are you really aggressive here? Or is this a time to play it a little bit more conservative given the guys who are going to be suited up for the Titans?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. Maybe I'm reading too much into this so you guys can tell me if I'm full of shit or not. But like that clip that went out from NFL Films this week, Taylor Lewan caught a lot of grief because there's that exchange where Lewan walks up to him and is like, what's the mindset on this drive? And Vrabel just looks at him like he'd look at one of us like an idiot when we ask a question that he doesn't want to deal with. And he's like, go score is the mindset. And everybody's looking at Lewan like, of course the mindset is to go score. But I think that kind of contextualizes some of what you're talking about, Steve, in that they're even Mike is used to these games playing out a little differently because he's used to his offense executing at a higher level than they did. And just as, Ryan Tannehill, if he gets behind the sticks in certain situations or he's thrown 2 interceptions, you start to force a little bit. I think that can happen to anybody. I think that's completely fair criticism. I don't know about you, Jimmy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and it was kind of good to see that we're not the only ones that take those responses from the head coach because I think we've all been hit with that before. This is the type of game that the Titans do need to take the points when they get them. Titans again, and I feel like they keep repeating this. They've got to get off to a good start, and if you get field goals on some of these early drives, can hang around. I think this is the type of game where the Titans just need to find a way to be in it in the fourth quarter and then try to steal it late. And if that's kicking field goals, early, maybe not being as aggressive as maybe he would be in the past. You don't want to be aggressive, not make a play up there and give that crowd. It's a tough place to play. Give the crowd even more reason to be juiced up. Get to the fourth, try to have a chance to win it. I think that's got to be the plan on Sunday.
It's going to be
because I think.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was just sorry to jump in there, but I was just going to say, if you even go back to Sunday and think about that game, I mean, how different does it look if the Titans get a couple field goals in that first half? Yeah. That doesn't sound like the offense would have taken over or whatever, but if it's just 12-6 at the half, how different does it feel? Even after the Chester Rogers muff punt to start the second half, you're still down just 2 scores. But the way it played out where they got absolutely nothing, it meant that they had an enormous hole to dig out of in the second half. And that's what they absolutely can't afford to have happen this Sunday, because they might get blown out if they find themselves down 12-0 or 14-0 or 19-0 at the half or early in the third quarter in New England.
Ryan Tannehill should never attempt 52 passes, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Against you. And then there's not a lot of quarterbacks that should attempt 52 passes. I mean, that's an outrageous, especially for this team and the way that they like to play. And you can't just pin it all on, whether it was or was not intentional grounding at the end of the first half to kind of set up a scoring opportunity for the Titans. You can't put yourself in that position. And I'm almost always somebody who says play the math in those circumstances, but you're right, Steve. I mean, the math doesn't matter if they just aren't making that play in the moment when the coaching staff puts them in the position to do so. The weather is going to be cold in New England, but it's supposed to be fairly nice for Foxborough this time of year. So maybe you're not having to slug it out the way that you did this past Sunday. But boys, I don't know what to expect. I know it's probably going to be ugly, and we'll be there to talk about it. And I appreciate you taking some time on this Friday.
It's definitely going to be ugly, Buck. There's no question about it. The question is, can this team win another ugly game? They're a ways away from playing pretty football. It may happen again this year, but it's probably not going to be Sunday. And the question is just, can they go up there and figure out a way, as they've done so many times already?
Jimmy, I swear to God, when Adrian Peterson bust off that 16-yard run on Sunday, it felt almost normal. I don't know. He may have needed a little WD-40 to get there. 16 yards, 12 yards. That stadium needed some juice.
It did, but I have to say, I mean, I think you saw it. That was encouraging when you saw holes like that opened up. And I do think it showed you. I mean, I think we all know if that's Derrick Henry on a couple of those runs, Foreman had one, Peterson had one. He's going the distance, and I think we saw Adrian being good enough to kind of get through the hole, but he just couldn't turn it into an explosive run. And as far as the Titans need this to be an ugly game. I mean, they're not going to win this one pretty. There's no question about that. We kind of talked about this at the beginning, just the limited weapons that they have and who qualifies as your biggest weapon. I mean, when you're making that argument, that's not a great scenario. But the Titans need to make this an ugly game, need to make it a field goal game. They're not going to light up the scoreboard this weekend, but the defense has got to be better. I think it's got to force some turnovers. And it's got to frustrate the Patriots the way the Texans frustrated the Titans this past week.
Jim Wyatt, TennesseeTitans.com is where you can read them. Of course, you can check out our buddy Steve Layman on News Channel 5. Steve, you going to the game?
I am going to the game. And by the way, we need to give props for Jim. I mean, he's at every game, but he has given up the streak this weekend.
I know. I thought about bringing it up. I didn't know if that was like sensitive topic for you, Jimmy. Do you want to tell the people what the hell we're talking about?
It's tough to accept, to be honest with you. I kind of knew every time when the schedule comes out in April, May, whenever it is, the first thing I look at is, who the Titans playing the weekend of the Vanderbilt Tennessee game. Because I went to my first Vanderbilt Tennessee game in 1978. My dad took me. And I have been to every Vanderbilt Tennessee game in Knoxville or Nashville ever since. And I've seen a lot of Vanderbilt losses. And one of the reasons why that streak got as long as it did, because Vandy won in 1982. And then they didn't win again until 2005. And I said, there's no way I'm going to miss seeing Vanderbilt beat Tennessee. It took 23 years to make it happen. But then it just continued. And I didn't want to give up the streak. I got to Oakland for a game back in 2013, a night game in Knoxville. I took a flight from Knoxville to Chicago, to San Francisco, took the BART to Oakland, walked across the bridge, and made it in the Oakland Coliseum about 45 minutes before kickoff. That year, I flew to Chicago day of. I drove to Jacksonville last year after the Vanderbilt Tennessee game. Didn't end until about 7 o'clock at night in Nashville, but it was an 8.5-hour drive to Jacksonville. I got to Jacksonville before the sun came up. Woke up the next morning after a couple hours sleep, went to the game. I've driven to Cincinnati, driven to Indianapolis after those games. I've done everything I possibly could keep that streak alive. But this is kind of the doomsday scenario for me, just being in Knoxville, trying to catch a flight to Boston. We all know it's tough to get to Foxborough. If you know, a lot of times you can fly to an NFL city, get an Uber, you're at the game in 10, 15 minutes. You know, there's a morning flight on Sunday out of Nashville, but it doesn't get there to close to 11. The game's at 1 o'clock up there. It's, you know, game day traffic trying to get to Foxborough. There's a real scenario where I wouldn't make it to the game. And the way the airlines are this year, with we all had flight trouble, get to Jacksonville, flights canceled. I just think it's too risky. So I am going to see the 43-year streak come to an end this weekend. I've never watched a Vanderbilt Tennessee game on TV my whole life, so it's going to be weird, but it's going to end. I threw out a Hail Mary. They had me on the radio the other day. I was trying to find a pilot. My wife was crazy for me to even accept a potential offer for a pilot. I said, hey, if they've got 100 flight hours, I'm good. And made themselves available. So streak's going to come to an end on Saturday, unfortunately.
The only good news there, Jimmy, is you saw them break the streak. You've seen a bunch of wins in recent years.
Yes.
I don't feel very confident that you're going to be missing a win this Saturday.
I do agree with that. Yeah.
5 of the last 9, though. I mean, they've been in it. They're 31-point dogs in your DraftKings Sportsbook apps if you're betting that game. But yeah, I think I'm going to put a little money on Vandy this time to cover. 31's a lot for a Tennessee team that just lost Tyon Evans. But we could keep going, and these gentlemen have things to do on a busy weekend. News Channel 5 is where you watch Steve Layman. TennesseeTitans.com, and all over the places where you find the great Jim Wyatt of the Tennessee Titans. Boys, I appreciate the time and safe travels up to the blustery Northeast.